This is WVOX 1460 AM, and my name is Tom Sullivan. When I was in college about a million years ago, my roommate junior year was a guy named Frank Palombo. We graduated in 1977. A year later, Frank joined the New York City Fire Department. In 1982, he and his wife Jean got married. Eventually, they became the parents of 10 children. I think I heard Frank had more children than any other member of the fire department at that time. Frank died on September 11th of 2001 at the World Trade Center. Of the thousands of people killed that day, there were 343 firemen who gave their lives in the greatest rescue mission in the city's history. And of course, in addition to the firemen, many police and emergency service workers sacrificed their lives as well. Frank was one of those brave people. The 10-year anniversary is upon us, and I am honored to be talking to Jean Palombo and to Frank and Jean's oldest child, Anthony. Jean and Anthony, thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Tom.
Jean, I would like to begin by asking you about Frank for people who never had the chance to know him. Tell us, please, about your husband. What was he like?
Well, I think my husband was a man of faith. He believed when oftentimes there was no good, obvious reason to believe, but he kept his faith and he went on. I used to call him like a bulldozer. He just went straight forward, not looking right or left, just proceeding forward. And it was thanks to that faith, actually, that got me into the church, and that allowed us to have 10 children on a firefighter's salary, and that gave us the beautiful life that we had. Was his great faith. He wasn't an easy person. He wasn't, St. Francis of Assisi or anything.
St. Frank of Palombo, I guess.
St. Frank of yeah. St. Frank of Brooklyn.
Of Brooklyn.
You have to have a little bit of a Brooklyn attitude.
He
definitely had that. Yeah, he wasn't an easy person to deal with on a day-to-day. He had definite set beliefs, and some people described him as being a little bit gruff, but a wonderful man, a great man, and certainly I thought he was great. I married him.
Of course. He was a religious man,
yes.
And I knew him many years ago. We went to college together, and even then he was definitely a man of strong faith and also strong convictions. Which sometimes caused him to have some arguments with people. He was not shy about saying what he thought, and even if that meant he took a little bit of flack at times.
Oh, he enjoyed the flack.
Yeah, I think some people like the debate,
Right.
They like the argument, and he seemed to thrive on that really. And junior year of college, I remember we were roommates, and I remember people saying to me, "Oh, you're going to have trouble with him." But I'll tell you something. I have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed the year that we were roommates. He also, I thought, had a very good sense of humor. I seem to remember laughing a lot. We laughed at each other a lot the year that we were roommates. He was a serious person, but he did see the funny side, and he could laugh at himself, too, I always thought.
Right, definitely.
Anthony, let me ask you about your experience as Frank's son. What was he like as a father?
I could say that even today, for sure, my father's still the model for me of what it means to be a Christian man. I think when I try to see myself, as an adult man, and especially as a Christian man, really, I look at what I remember of my father, how he was, how he raised us, how he gave his life, for us, for his kids,
yes.
all the time, for his family.
Yeah, I'm sure that, the father of 10 children, and Eugene, the mother of 10 children, lots of challenges. but clearly having a large family, you can't do it without being, I think, a person of faith and conviction, and certainly you both had that. Anthony, you are, for people who don't know, a seminarian. You were studying for the priesthood, and would you say your father may have been an influence in that direction?
Absolutely. Before he died, he was a big influence in me wanting to be a priest. I think that there was a lot of it that I wanted to do it also to please him, because I got the impression from him that he wanted me to be a priest, and that was a big reason I was doing it. After he died, I was kind of left with a bit of a question, because so many things that I was doing in my life were done in order to get his approval, in order to please him, and I had to rethink a little bit why I was doing the things that I do. And really, I mean, today I could say, I mean, I'm in the seminary, and my father is still a big influence, even though, I mean, gratefully now I'm not doing it only for him.
Right.
But but now I can see that a lot of the influence that he had, I mean, on the family, I mean, helping us to pray, also, I mean, the help of my mom and all the graces that God has given her since my dad died, to see really how much God has worked in my families, and especially through my parents, is a huge reason why today, I mean, I'm in the seminary, for sure.
I'm sure he was a strong influence, and I would imagine probably on all of you. You know, as I recall, 10 years ago, because we are at the 10-year anniversary now, you were a student at Cathedral Prep, I believe, at that time. You were in high school?
In high school.
And I also went to Cathedral Prep in Queens. Now, your father went to Cathedral Prep, which in those days there were two. There was one in Brooklyn, and there was one in Queens. And the Brooklyn school has subsequently closed, and so kind of everybody goes to Cathedral Prep Queens now. And you know, it must have been a very, very difficult time in your life when your father died, and at a time when you, a young person, you're the oldest of the 10 children, I believe.
Yeah.
And you were in high school, and you know, just a very challenging, difficult situation for the whole family to deal with. Did you feel that you drew upon your faith a lot to get you through that very difficult time?
I think in the beginning, for me, I would say it was very difficult. I remember thinking that that if God were to allow something like this to happen to my family, that that if He exists, that I really questioned whether He existed and how much He really cared about us.
Right.
At first, for sure. But over time, I think, and especially between, first of all, the faith that my parents passed on to me, and also through the neo-catechumenal way, even though I was questioning everything, kind of this persistent undertone that was already set in my life. And it really, it brought me back at a certain point, that even though I was questioning for, I would say, 3 years maybe, that really this kind of stuck to me. And in the end, between the faith that my parents passed on to me and the neo-catechumenal way, it was really what brought me back. And in the end, helped me to see the death of my father not only as some terrible curse, but to see how really through this event that God was allowing our family to see how really He's our Father in a special way. Like the Bible always says that God is Father of the orphans and defender of the widows, and to see how He looks out for us in a special way.
You know, that I realize that there's all kinds of things that go on in people's lives when they're faced with tragedy, and you know, people I think often wonder how you could get through a situation like that. Gene, what was that like for you? And I know it's not just a one-time event, but this has been an ongoing reality for 10 years now. And I think people would want to know, Gene, how do you feel about how did you get through that difficult time?
Well, I would have to respond similarly to Anthony. I think for a moment for me it was to see that the church was there for me, that it's just a moment where you're looking and you're saying, okay, I can't do this. I'm not capable. Somebody's going to come and take these 10 children from me, because everybody knows I cannot raise 10 children. You know, Frank was still raising me. And then I think through the help of the church, through the sacraments, always being able to rely on the sacraments, like Anthony said, we belong to the Neo-Catechumenal Way, and in that way, I belong to a small community. And my community kind of kept me sane. You could always turn to someone. When I wasn't able to pray, my community prayed for me. When I wasn't able to get out of the bed, they came over and did things for me. So I would say through the church, through frequenting the sacraments, was really the way that I got through it and continue to get through it.
Sometimes people say, how can you believe in God in a world where such terrible things happen? But I kind of look at it another way. It's like, how could you not believe in God? What do you have to sustain you? What do you have to rely upon when you're faced with great tragedy and loss? It's interesting. When Frank Palombo and I became roommates junior year of college, I noticed that he was a great admirer of C.S. Lewis, and I knew next to nothing about C.S. Lewis at that point. But Frank had this complete set of C.S. Lewis books that was on his bookshelf, and he was quite devoted to Mr. Lewis, and that was kind of my introduction to Lewis, who talks a lot about loss. In fact, he has a book called The Problem of Pain that deals exactly with faith in the light of evil, and certainly you're no strangers to dealing with the effects of evil, this terrible attack on our city, and the loss of your husband and father. But Frank himself was a man of great faith. I had an opportunity just once to talk to Father Michael Judge, the New York City Fire Department chaplain, who was himself killed on September 11th, and I had a long conversation with him. It's the only time I ever spoke to him, and he talked about how firemen are very close to God. He said they don't all go to church, and some of them may not even necessarily see themselves as religious, but they are holy men, and you couldn't not be. And I know that Frank saw being a fireman as a vocation. He believed that this was something that God was calling him to do. And I just would imagine that, it's interesting that he died doing what God had called him to do. And maybe in looking at it that way, maybe you found that helpful in some way.
I think for me it was definitely helpful, because I think Frank had a desire to give his life fully and totally. And he did that every day at home. I mean, Frank went to work every day when he had his tour, and when he came home, he cooked, he cleaned, he did laundry, he went shopping. He was very involved with the children. He was very involved with the community and the evangelization in our parish. And he enjoyed giving his life. I kind of felt that Frank would be like, yes, kind of like, I got to, like, this is the big triumph. I got to give my life in such a great way, that he would be very happy, that this would be the ultimate for him.
It's interesting because I married into a fire department family. My wife has two brothers, New York City firemen, and she had two uncles who were firemen. Her grandfather was a fireman, and so it is kind of a family thing. The fire department, they see themselves as family, I think, in a lot of ways. And most firemen, because you can retire after 20 years, most of them do, and then they go on and do other things. Somebody had told me, because I know Frank was in, I guess, 23 years he was a fireman.
Right.
And could have retired, but he believed, and somebody who talked to him around that time told me this, he believed that God was continuing to call him to be a fireman, and that was what he was going to do.
Right.
And he was just really an amazing guy. I remember reading so much news coverage, of course, after September 11, talking about the many people who gave their lives on that day. So thousands of people died, including so many firemen, police, emergency service people that were all eternally indebted to. But there were like profiles, and I came across a couple of things about Frank in various news accounts, and they always talked about he was like from Brooklyn. He was a tough guy from Brooklyn, and there's that kind of stereotype, I think, about what that means.
Right.
And he certainly was a strong man, but I think he was maybe a little different than what people would think from the stereotype, at least as I remembered him so many years ago now. I remember him, he wrote poetry, you know. We had a school magazine, a poetry magazine, and he was constantly writing for that. I don't know whether he kept up with that over the years, but at one point, that was something that he really liked to do. He also, I remember, he wanted to write music, and I don't think he had much of a real facility for that.
Right, I don't think that went anywhere.
But he wanted to do it, you know. And
that's interesting because most of his children do play musical instruments.
Is that right?
Now, though, so now we know where that comes from.
I remember he got himself like an Emini electric organ, and when he had it in our room, and he didn't know how to play it.
Poor you.
But that didn't stop him, you know, and he was very determined, and you know, he kind of had the soul of a poet. He kind of had the soul of an artist, and I think it's a little bit different than maybe what people think of when they think of like kind of a tough guy from Brooklyn.
Right.
But,
well, I think right. It's true when people say, because I do think him as a very tough man.
Yes.
As far as not swaying to the left or swaying to the right, he kept himself steady down the center, and that's where he was. Tough as far as, you know, he would beat anybody up. That kind of tough, absolutely not.
Right.
No, he did have definitely. I still have all his poems and all his writings from, you know, that he had collected. So and also photography. He liked photography.
That's right. I do
also.
remember that. And he was then, you know, I have a quick story. He was the president of the photography club at school, and I remember one time when we had first become roommates. I went down the hall to take a shower, and I came back from having taken my shower, and there was a sign on the door, "Don't come in." And what happened was Frank was using our room as a dark room. He was developing pictures in there. So I had to you know, a bathrobe and towel. I had to go like hang out in somebody else's room for a couple of hours while Frank developed pictures.
So you
know.
were the same.
But see, like I thought that was funny. You know, somebody else might have gotten a little mad about that, but. But I think we sort of got a kick out of each other, you know.
And now he was supposed to retire in January of 2002.
Okay.
He was set to to retire.
Okay.
I had just graduated with my master's in that June and taken all my exams and had been certified as of September 1st, 2001. And the plan was for me to go and teach, and he was going to stay home, do some handyman stuff,
Sure.
and get back into the writing. So, I think writing and photography and all that stuff was still very much a part of who he was.
I think it was, and I'm glad that he was able to keep up with that through the years. You know, it's funny the impact that people have on other people's lives. I remember going out to dinner with Frank the year after we graduated college. So this was sometime in 1978, and he was talking about how you have to do something important with your life. You have to do something for other people. You have to make a difference. And he told me about this place called Covenant House in Times Square, which I had never really heard of. And he'd been reading about it, and he wanted to go and volunteer there. And he said, well, you should do that too. He said, it's an important thing to do. You should do it. So I said, okay, that sounds good. And so Frank and I went through the training together. They had an orientation program. And we went through orientation, and we started volunteering at Covenant House. And as it turned out, he got called to the fire department very shortly after that. So he wasn't able to stay there very long because he became very busy becoming a fireman. But I ended up getting very involved at Covenant House for several years, and that was where I met my wife. Later on that same year, I met my wife, and we've been married 30 years now and have 3 children. But, it never occurred to me that I would never have met her if it hadn't been for Frank Palombo, because I had no thought of going there at all. And he talked me into doing that. And, you never know the impact that people have. And in many ways, I owe my family to Frank Palombo. So I will always be grateful to him for that. He was an amazing man. I remember, I guess it was about a year after Frank's death, that 2020, the ABC program, did a segment on your family. I believe, am I right? Was that Connie Chung who came to your house?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I think it was the Christmas right after Frank's death.
Okay, so it wasn't long afterwards at all. And I remember they went to your home and showed all the children. You have such a beautiful family. And the one thing I do remember about that, I remember Connie Chung asking one of your little boys, asking him about his father. And she said to him, "Where is your father now?" And he said, "He's in my heart." And I don't know that I would have asked a question like that. But, it's interesting. And the way that kids look at things, it was very touching. It was very inspiring, as I recall. It was really an amazing moment. Let me ask you about the kids. We've been talking about Anthony a little bit. How's everybody doing, and what's everybody up to?
I think everybody seems to be doing well. The mom is always the last to know, but everybody seems well. 8 of them went on this pilgrimage, the World Youth Day pilgrimage, and
That's
all very
great.
happily. They're all in the church in their own communities, and they enjoy it. My second son will be graduating next June, and
From college.
From college, right? And he had taken 2 years off to do some missionary work in Estonia. So he's, each of the children had a year. Anthony spent a year in Israel. Frankie spent 2 years, a year in Estonia and a year in the States doing some evangelization. My third son, Joseph, is in Pace studying, and he spends a year in Israel also. And then my daughter, Maria, is studying nursing, and she took a year off, and she spent it in the Dominican Republic doing some missionary work. And Thomas now is in college. He's studying teaching, but he's also Thomas and John, the next one who's just starting college, they're going to take the New York City firefighters test because that's a dream of theirs.
That's wonderful.
And
so you have two daughters, right?
2 daughters, right?
Right.
Maria, who's studying nursing, and Maggie, the youngest one. She's 10 years old.
Well, you're an amazing woman. You have an amazing family. I'm sure, you talk about the support of your church, which I'm sure was so important. But family, of course, is very important also. Now, I seem to remember, if I recall, you have 2 brothers, Mike and Ray. Am I correct about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember Frank talking about them, because I know he was friends with both of them and went to school, high school, I think, with both of them.
Right.
And he said, I remember him telling me all those years ago that, they were like both among the finest people that he had ever met, and this was long before you and Frank got married. He clearly loved your family, and I'm sure they've been a great resource, and they were a great resource to Frank. I mean, clearly they were people who were important to him.
Right. Well, he was best friends with my brother Ray. That's actually how we met. Was my brother Ray brought him home from school, and I had a huge crush on him, and that was it. But I have 7 brothers and sisters.
Oh, you have a large family
so,
too.
yeah, and I'm the youngest, and I don't know what I would do without them. They're great. They help us out a lot, and they're there for us, and not on top of us, but you just call out, and they're right there. So, yeah.
tremendous resource. Now, you also are someone who's living with cancer. I know we've talked about that a little bit, and your life has not been without its challenges, certainly. And it occurs to me that there are people who they feel very overwhelmed, and you've certainly had a lot to deal with. You're living with cancer. You have 10 children. You lost your husband. You are certainly a really inspiring person, and I think you must feel at times overwhelmed, and I think people want to know what inspires you in your life.
The church. That's it. That's really it, because there are days I get up and I think, this is a crazy life. What happened? God, kind of like Anthony was saying, he felt years ago, looking up and saying, God, either you don't exist, which doesn't make any sense at all, or you absolutely hate me. And what is it that I've done? What have I done that you have this against me? And I can really sink into that. And if it wasn't for the church, like I said, for my community, for the sacraments, for the faith of my children, Anthony talked about his parents passing faith to him. So there comes a point in a child's life where they begin to give faith to the parents back. And so my children's faith, the church, the sacraments, that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me fighting against all these temptations that come, and bad thoughts about God, and being able to confess. And for me, when Frank died, God kind of became like my husband. Now Frank and I could have some really good arguments and some really good reconciliations, and I feel like I have the same with God now. I have some really good fights, and sometimes they go on for a long time.
Right.
Sometimes I don't want to talk to him.
Right.
Sometimes what I have to say to him, we probably couldn't say on the air.
Yes.
But we reconcile, and I go and I ask forgiveness, and, that's what the church is there for, to keep this relationship going.
I think
God, volatile as it may be.
Yeah, I think it's understandable that people get mad at God and that you can fight with God sometimes, and that's okay,
Right. I mean, that's what betters the relationship.
Yes. No,
There's no sound relationship with God that didn't involve a fight or two.
I think so.
Right.
And the things that, the bad things that happen, the terrible things that happen, I have found sometimes with people, you can go sort of one way or the other. Some people become angry and embittered and depressed, and we all struggle with that. But a lot of times you do notice, and I'm sure it's true in your case, that people who've grown in their lives, who become kinder, more loving, better people, in many ways it's a response to pain. And I don't know if that explains it. I don't think anything explains why some of these things happen. But you do see people who are really transformed by suffering, and it's a mystery, and someday I guess we'll all know the answer. But it's a question that we live with. I read a wonderful book recently. I don't know if you read it or not, but there's a book called Heaven is for Real. I don't know if you know that book by...
no, I don't.
A guy by the name of Todd Burpo wrote a book. It had to do with his son. His son had one of those near-death experiences, and he was only like 4 years old when he came very close to death and had these visions where it seems like he might have actually crossed over and gotten a little bit of a glimpse. And the book is top of the bestseller list, but I found it very affirming, actually. And I love the title, that Heaven is for Real. A lot of people who think this is all there is, there ain't no more. Life can be very sad if that's what you think about. But the idea that, as Frank believed, you go to God, and I'm sure that that's something that has sustained you in your life.
Right, and keeping that, like Frank went through life, kind of, let's look forward, let's look at God, and let's go straight for that. And despite all the things that are telling you, no, don't go towards God, that's crazy. To have 10 children on a firefighter's salary, that's crazy.
Some people would think that. Some people would think to have 10 children, period, is crazy.
Right. People do think that that's crazy, but somehow, through God, through our faith, through the community, we did that. And, the fruits, the rewards, the blessings from that have been unbelievable. People were saying to me before Frank's death, oh, my gosh, 10 children, she shouldn't have any more. She shouldn't have any more. This is ridiculous. This is crazy. And then after Frank died, everybody said, oh, thank God she has the children. And with my cancer, the same thing. Oh, thank God she has the children. So kind of a lot of people shunned Humanae Vitae.
Right.
But let me tell you, I'm sorry for them because they missed on one of the greatest gifts of the church, to be open to life, to have all the children that God wants you to have. It's a great blessing.
Children are a gift from God, and people don't always see it that way. And there are times when none of us see it that way, when they're driving us a little bit crazy. But they are our treasure, and I am sure that your children have been a great blessing to you, and will continue to be, and will, thank God that we have you in the world, and we need more people like you in the world. And thank God that we had Frank Palombo, who truly a great man. And I want to thank both of you. I really do appreciate your spending a little time with us. And I think that your presence here is a blessing and an inspiration. And thank you both.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Okay, God bless and goodbye. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.